JT Crowley is Talking Books. On the show, you'll hear from emerging talent and seasoned veterans from around the world.
Hello, I'm JT Crowley. I'm the host of Talking Book Show on Web Talk Radio. And today I welcome the American author Bill Boushka to talk about his third book in the Do Ask, Tell series. So the title of the book is Do Ask, Do Tell. Speech is a fundamental right, and being listened to is a privilege. Now, this is the third book, everybody, but I want to make one thing clear. There are 3 books in this series. And to understand this book and get a grip, a feel for this book, you have to read all the 3 books. So you have to read them in sequence. So you have to read the first book in the series, then the second, and then this one, because then you'll get the understanding of the entire series. That is important. But for the purpose of this podcast, we're just focusing on the third book. And, when I looked at it, the general themes of the book are individualism and personal responsibility, especially how these precepts apply to gay equality and free speech issues. And the last book that we'll mainly feature and focus on, yes, is this individualism is more prevalent than the previous books. And we talk about internet freedom and gay equality, including marriage and parenting, workplace and elder care. Especially with elder care, Bill is talking more about Alzheimer and the issues around that. Now, the book is made up of 2 parts. You have part 1 under the heading non-fiction, and it comprises of a foreword, prologue, whatever you want to call it. In the UK, we sometimes call it prologue, and in America, sometimes it's just foreword. So it's just a mishmash of words here. And we've got 6 non-fiction chapters. Yes, you will see 5 distinguished chapters, but Bill is really including the epilogue as kind of a 6th chapter, everybody. And then we go to part 2, which is the fiction part. And here we find 3 short stories, all written at different times. And the short stories give a fictional account of Bill's personal experience whilst, conscripted to the U.S Army Services in 1961 around basic combat training, a roommate's reunion, and a bizarre and adventure coupled with acceptance of an instant family. And the words there are important, instant family. And the scenario is whether it's you like it or not. Now, as I said, you need to read all the 3 books in sequence. And to find them, you can just go to the written introduction that accompanied this podcast on Web Talk Radio, click the Talking Book Show page, and the written version there has all more information about who Bill is and about the third book, but was also highlighting the other 2 books as well. And it also puts on there his social media sites and his web pages. Go and have a look. You'll see more about Bill, what he's about, what the series really is driving at. So, what is this book about? What is the series about? Well, I've got a slight inclination because I've had the great privilege to have a look at this third book. But the person who knows all about it, of course, is the author himself, is Bill. So I'm going to invite him on the show to come and chat to me so he can tell us a little bit about himself and what the backdrop, the background to this series and mainly this third book. Bill, all the way from the United States of America, would you like to come and join me on the show?
Good afternoon.
Now, well, that was a short introduction, wasn't it, everybody? Good afternoon. Yes. You see, Bill is in the US, I'm in the UK, so we have got a 5-hour time difference. And for me, it's just gone 7 o'clock in the evening, and I think for Bill, it's just gone past 2 o'clock in the afternoon for him. So, Bill, before we open the book, could you briefly tell the audience who you are and what's the backdrop to this story?
Okay. I was born in 1943. I'm an only child. My parents were reasonably stable and well off. My father was a manufacturer's representative for a glass company. We bought a house at the start of 1950, and I spent 12 years in the same public school. I was sickly as a child and fell behind in physical education as to what is expected of boys. Maybe because of measles in the second grade, that might have been the reason. But I started catching up somewhat physically in high school with puberty, but I never caught up completely. And began noticing felt attracted, interested in men that were very more masculine than I was. And I started noticing that physically, and didn't really talk about it. And then that when I went away to college the first year, there were some issues with how I adapted to living in a dorm, were quite subtle. And I was asked to leave school right after Thanksgiving at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg in the fall of 1961. Very complicated story, which is explained in the books. Then I graduated from George Washington University in Washington, D.C. in the winter of 1966. Actually had a stint at NIH as an inpatient and then worked for a year, but I still graduated in the 4 years. Went to the University of Kansas for graduate school, finished my master's in math in 1968. Actually served 2 years in the Army, although I was kind of sheltered by my education, and that's interesting. Wound up in special training and in basic training because I was behind physically still. That's interesting. And then I had a long work career in information technology and mainframe technology, which I sort of grew up along with it. Things were not as fast and as efficient in the early days as things changed a lot during my career. And then we got through Y2K, moved several times, lived in Texas, lived in New York, then lived in Texas as a gay man, came out again, that is, and lived, survived the AIDS epidemic. That's a long story how I escaped that. I was in Texas then. Came and then was laid off at the end of 2001 after 9/11, the 9/11 attacks affected my company. Went back with mother, who died in 2010, and then I've been on my own within inherited house, and then I moved into a condo. But I've been writing, blogging a lot, planning possibly there could be film possibilities for the books, and we'll talk about the theme of the book in a minute. The
Okay.
books I'll take in a minute, but that's the general biography. It was brains without brawn, basically. Put it that way, or street or smart book smarts instead of street smarts. You can
Do you
put
know
it that way.
what? Do you know what, Bill? A combination of both really works in life. It's about, um, you can have people in life who can be fantastic academics, but absolutely no good at being practical. And then you can have the streetwise kids who are probably the opposite, but yet they both survive. Um, but everybody brings a different aspect to life. And when I've looked at your book, there are many aspects that you're bringing from your experience to your books, to this series. And I stress the series, everybody. Read the three books. They won't make sense in the other order. So, Bill, let's open the book and head straight to the foreword in part one, because I thought this was brilliant. I thought this really, really started to touch upon the issues and get to the point of this book. You title this section, do ask, do tell. To sustain ourselves as individuals, we must become social creatures again. Here I find you're introducing us to a whole plethora of issues, thoughts, around music, around William and Mary expulsion, graduation, AIDS epidemic, elder care. You're talking about all sorts of things here. You're introducing us to what this book is going to be about. So my question, Bill, is why did you decide to put in a foreword? and why the contents within? And what do you want readers to get out of it?
Okay, part of the content was to know what the contents of the previous book had been, particularly the first book, and how, if I was rewriting the entire thing, how I would structure the chapters. But the other thing was this overriding thing that I had been a lone wolf all my life, and I wasn't very sociable, and that to be heard, to get people to pay attention to you, sometimes you have to be willing to be involved with their issues and their problems and meet them where they are socially. And so that's the meaning of that. We have to become social creatures again in the foreword. And it sort of sticks out that that's the title of the foreword, but I don't really talk that much. I talk about a lot of other things in the foreword besides that, the books themselves, but that is what sticks out. That's becoming more apparent that if people can express their ideas in speech a lot and debate things and just talk past each other if they don't share experiences socially. And I guess that's one of the reasons why society has become so polarized in the United States. And I think it sounds like it's pretty polarized in Europe too, in Britain.
Oh, yeah.
More or less the same,
Oh,
really.
yeah, yeah. And you also talk about, or you touch upon, you see your life in three periods, the music period, the second coming, and the personal period. You touch upon those as well here. Fascinating.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The music period is my growing up because I was very good at piano. I've composed some things. You can see him on the piano behind me. If you, and could do more with it. I'd like to actually finish some of that. And I played, I could have almost become a pianist, but it takes so much to do that to become a professional concert musician. That didn't quite happen, and it was very difficult for boys this time I was growing up to pull that off. But that, something that might almost have happened. And that I had a record collection, and I was very good at identifying classical things that I heard, and I knew classical music real well, and that stayed with me in my ears. In my memory, I could identify things on the radio that I heard other people couldn't. So that was the kind of the gift. And after only 2 or 3 hearings, I could identify them. And I had a reputation for that in high school. That's kind of how I built my social reputation. Also with the Science Honor Society, I got invited into that in senior year in high school. We went on a trip. I didn't go to the prom, but we went on a trip to Mount Washington in New Hampshire, Memorial Day weekend, which is a very important mountain area in the East Coast of the United States, in New England. Really important experience for me that summer.
So I get this as, think that the conclusion is for the reader is that if you want to get your story out there, you want to make something, and make society realize who you
Yes,
are, is to go out and be more social. Am I correct?
that's true. That's basically
Okay.
true. But you kind of have to see people where they are sometimes.
You
Sometimes
do.
that's very challenging.
You do.
They're
You
not in the
have to
same place you
understand
are.
where they are at the moment as well
Yeah,
as where
yeah,
you
yeah.
are. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Let's delve into the book a little bit more. Let's go to chapter 1, Bill. Music rules the world. Of course, this was your first period,
Right.
music. You talk about hustle and flow. You talk about sexual awakening. You talk about grand imposition. You talk about elder care, especially with those of Alzheimer's. This is a very busy chapter, and you're talking about lots of things. So, would you like to, tell the audience what's your underlying thinking here? And
Okay. This was, as I was saying, this was my attempt to anchor my place in the world, but with content, particularly music. Music was the most important thing. And as well as intellectual content. Chess. I learned to play chess. I got better at that. That was real important to me, particularly by the time I was an undergraduate. Um, and science. I thought I wanted to be a chemist. Academics mattered. The academic world was interesting when I was an undergraduate. And even after getting thrown out of William and Mary, I was quiet. It wasn't talked about again for another 12 years or so until 1973. But during that period, I did a lot of interesting things. I was in the Army, and couldn't really talk about it openly. I had to deal with security clearances and everything. I started working, and I sort of, even my first two, I had two jobs, a job with RCA with several assignments around the country, and then I worked for the government and for the Navy Department. You had to get a security clearance for this. It's a long story, but I had a very interesting time socially there. I tried to date girls for a while, and that was actually interesting. That's a little story in itself, what happened. It's kind of tied in a little bit to the Nixon and China thing. And I had this friend that I looked up to, that I felt affiliated with, I met at work, who left the Navy Department. And then I sort of followed him, going to the same company, Univac. He actually helped me leave and go to Univac. After going to Europe, I went to Europe and traveled a lot. And for a while, that was interesting. And once I went away from home the second time in the fall of 1972, I was living near New York City and going into the city a lot. I was going to discover, the gay world, and again, was going to be more on my own, less under the influence of my parents and of the old values. And that set me up to come out a second time, which I did in 1973, which I have explained, and actually it was in the first book. But that's what that chapter is about, is everything until, essentially, particularly until I came out the second time in 1973, and then lived as a gay adult for since then, which is 50, I guess that's 52 years if you count until now. So the first book sort of sets up the pre-gay adult life, essentially. That chapter one actually sets up my life before I came out a second time and what that was like. And it was actually quite interesting that you could make short films from a couple things that happened during that period, particularly this thing about Nixon and China and so forth. You could actually do something with that in a movie idea that I've had. So, and also visiting the strip mines, which is, well, that gets ahead. That's the short story at the end, but you could do something with that. That comes from that period.
Yeah,
So that's essentially.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. When you move on to chapter 2, which you titled "The Virtue of Maleness," I thought that caught my eye, and I thought, what's this chapter about? So yes, this chapter certainly intrigued me, and here I find you, and you're breaking up the chapter with further subheadings, like gridiron, yes, schizoid. You're talking about dynamic equality, an alien's view of anthropology, and again, here I find you opening up, about your own sexual pathways, relationships, both gay and straight. And for me, I thought this was a very sensitive chapter, but it's a fascinating, and it's packed full of intrigue and detail. And I think this is you telling people about your own sexual awakenings. Am I right? And
That's
would you care
correct.
to
That's
share
right.
the audience, what do you want
Well,
the audience to get from this chapter?
okay. There was certain, um, I guess I had a soul truth. Truth, reality, you could say, is public reality, what we accept is the real world, your own private life, and then your own soul, what things you believe in your own soul that make your life work, but that you know or not how the rest of the world perceives reality, but that are important to you.
Yeah.
And so I sort of split my sense of that into it's a small part of your work. It's not what the rest of the world sees of you. It's what you really feel. And I felt, I was behind in maleness, essentially. I didn't develop properly as a biological male the way I should have. Now that I'm willing to own that fact and own the responsibility for it, even if I didn't choose it, even if there were measles or genetics or pre-birth hormones or whatever, whatever it might have been could have led to that. There obviously something biologically must have happened. But I, the idea that being affiliated with a man that was more attractive and masculine than I was meant something. And I thought that affiliating with someone who was both smart and had both brains and blonde was a good thing. And there are certain things about male sexual attractiveness that are not the same. And I don't want between different races. For example, white men have more body hair than men of other races. That was significant to me, and it's very sensitive. But the fact is, that affected how I perceived people because I grew up in more or less a segregated society. My high school didn't start becoming integrated until probably after I left high school. So I lived in a white world. So that was how I reacted to people.
So do
And
you
then as a
think
result,
that, so do you think that you are the person right from birth, you are given a set of genes, and whether those genes are steering you down the what we call the straight way or another way?
I think there are certainly zones. I think there are probabilities, sort of like a probability distribution. I think some people, if they try hard enough, can live a straight life and have intercourse with women and produce children, even if they're not as masculine. If they get through certain things and if there's enough social pressure, because in other cultures, non-Western cultures, particularly in other parts of the world, including Russia and then China and Africa and so forth, and many non there's a lot of pressure on men to provide for families, and most people manage to somehow learn to do it under great
Oh,
pressure. A very small number of people will not be able to do it. Um, but more people will prefer not to do it if they think their lives are self-expressive, if they simply don't have children and live according and then nurture their own soul values that they think of as their truth, even if it's not truth publicly speaking, even if it, and they'll pass the word, the word a lot of people use is passing. It's
mm.
conventional or passing is straight or passing is this now cisgender is what people talk about now. But that wasn't at the time of the book, but passing, in other words, looking, a lot of gay men, for example, are very masculine in the way they behave publicly and so they pass and so then some other people are not as able to do that and behave according even in society and publicly according to society's expectations, and they are going to have a harder time getting along. And that's what a lot of the problems today are about, particularly in the last 10 years. And that's been particularly more the case since the book was written than it was at the time I was writing it,
Sure. Yeah.
as you know.
I
Yeah.
was just curious as to your viewpoint there because I've chatted to quite a few
Mhm.
people and they've all got different viewpoints. So I was just intrigued as to where you were coming from on that issue. Now, Bill, um, most people, today of our generation, find, keeping up with the internet and with modern technology a little challenging at times. And here I find you with chapter 3, you've titled this Broadcast Yourself.
Right.
And I find you engaging on a whole host of modern day issues around the internet, social media sites, self-regulation, influencers. Um, and you are talking about freedom of speech, on the internet and social media sites, online bullying, global feedback. And should organizations like, some of these big companies, should they be held responsible for the content that gets put out on their sites, or should it just be total
Right.
free speech?
Section 230 in the United States. That's the Section 230 issue.
Yeah,
In Britain, I don't think you have that. I'm not quite sure. In
no,
England,
no.
right.
So, and you're talking so much. It's a God, that's a busy chapter. You're talking about March of the Trolls, the Supreme Court, from strike minds to the boardroom, a whole host of things. So, why this chapter? Why the contents? And where are you going with it?
What I was talking right after when I wrote the book, when I was writing the book, mostly from the first book, mostly from 1994 to 1997. We didn't really have the internet working very much yet. We're starting to get email. By about 1996 into 1997, it was becoming possible for people to have their own domains and put their own writings out there for anyone to find. And search engines, even though people would try to get you to pay to have the sites indexed, search engine indexing became free. And so it turned out that in my case, that I could write essays and then I could actually put the books online. If people didn't buy them, I could still get people to read my point of view by just putting it out on the internet. It turns out that the search engines found them very quickly. And it turns out that probably a few 100,000 people a year were coming into contact with my writing, and enough to actually know what I was talking about, probably in the hundreds of thousands a year. Even though there weren't that many copies being sold, a lot of people were finding out what I had to say. And this is particularly because of the argument I was making, which was back in the first book, that forced intimacy in a college dorm was parallel to forced intimacy in the barracks in the military 30 years later, when we were debating gays in the military in the United States, which I think in Britain happened sooner than it did in the United States.
Yes.
The don't ask, don't tell policy, in fact, wouldn't be repealed until the end of 2010 or early 2011. And it's still actually, it hasn't been unrepealed. The things that have happened here since then have been just trans. So I just thought I'd mention that to make sure there's no misunderstanding that the repeal is still in place. But it was the important thing here is that my putting it out for people to find it. And when this was an unusual issue, because it talks about forced intimacy, people being in in a sex place where some people are sexually attractive and might be attracted to each other and so forth, particularly among men, and particularly in the military. That was a sensitive issue to talk about. And so I put it out there and let search engines find it. So I was able to have a big effect on particularly that issue. I think without my doing what I did, it's even possible that it wouldn't have been repealed in 2010. I actually think that's a reasonable statement. So the fact that I could do this without even having to commercialize it, without even having to sell a lot of copies, that I could use the internet to leverage what I had to say and let people find it, was a very big deal. Now, and this was new that someone could do this. And also, this was before social media algorithms that sort of started coming around after 2008, after the 2008 crisis. 2009, 2010, Facebook started and Twitter started becoming big. And then the algorithms sort of started taking off with smartphones in maybe 2011, 2012, 2013. Now, I wrote the book in 2013, and I wasn't really aware when I was writing the book how important the algorithms were going to become and how people socialize, particularly teenage girls, for the silly things that you see, on TikTok and so forth. I was more serious about this, but the search engines alone, before we had social media, provided a lot of opportunity for people to learn things on their own by fishing around on the internet. It wasn't until about 2011 or 2012 that the social media algorithms really started taking over. But even without that, even with just the search engines, I was able to have a big effect. Now, some people may not like that, and they may not like the fact that I've inherited money and don't have to make a living off of it to have that kind of an effect. That's an issue. Well, no, seriously, that could be an
Yeah,
issue.
yeah.
It could be an ethical issue.
And
Maybe
of
somebody
course,
wouldn't
when
let
you
me
wrote the
adopt
book in
this.
2013,
Yeah,
you were not aware of artificial intelligence, AI,
right,
which is
right.
so dominant these days. And
Yeah,
we all use it. It's fantastic. Yes,
right.
some of the answers are actually unbelievable, but
ChatGPT,
that's the
yeah.
majority of it's good.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So what I did was effective at the time that I did it. I'm not as effective now as younger people with these big platforms on YouTube, and I'm not as effective, but I was effective earlier than these people are today. My time was more 20 years ago than it is now.
Your time was
And
more, shall I
actually,
say, in like chapter 4, which you head up just mainframes and then a huckster. You know,
yeah,
and this part of the book, is intriguing to say the least, everybody. And your various
yeah,
headings here. It's a snappier chapter for me, but the two areas that really got my attention was the run and career cardiac arrest.
yep. The run,
I was
yeah,
fascinated with these bits of the book. So
yeah.
tell us.
The run was for a while. My career kind of started off slowly as IT business data processing on mainframe computers for banks and insurance companies and really big companies matured in the 1970s, but the workplace then was much slower paced and getting things done took much longer then. So being efficient wasn't the same as it is now in the work, and it was slower paced. But you had to learn to be very careful about things that were going to run in production every night and run millions of records and affect customers. So when you put something into production, you had to be very careful. You also had to be very careful about the integrity of the source versus the object code that some sort of attempt to cheat money or something couldn't get into the system. There were all kinds of things you had to become aware of that could end your career if you weren't careful about it. And gradually, as I matured, I would become aware of these dangers and had to learn how to take measures to prevent these risks from happening. That's part of it. The run specifically, I hadn't put anything that was in 1985. That was Labor Day weekend, 1985. And I had moved to Texas at the start of 79. And why is another story in itself. But the run, I had worked for a Blue Cross consortium for 3 years. It was trying to compete with EDFs to make a new Medicare system. And the project failed. So that wasn't good I didn't really put anything into production for 3 years. Then I went over to Chilton, which was now part of Experion. It's been bought by TRW and Experion, but that's who they are now. And a credit reporting company, and we didn't put anything into production. But still, the pace was rather slow, which meant I had time for my personal life. But then things picked up around 85, and I put my first big move into production that Labor Day weekend. So I drove in on Sunday morning. That was the run, the end of month run for
Ah.
billing, and I babysitted all day ran all these bureaus. We didn't have any problems at that. So no, we didn't. And this was Labor Day weekend. I was just supporting it. I wasn't paid overtime. I was salaried. I wasn't paid to do that. I didn't get paid for the gas or anything to go in to do that. That's just the way it was. But I was relatively well now because I didn't have a family. I had more disposable income than people that take out big mortgages on houses and have big expenses for their children, which is another major point I talk about in the books. Um, but the run was getting back into competence and actually doing a production run. And then That's 1985. I would say until the layoff at ING in 2001, I was pretty much responsible for production systems pretty continuously for 16 years. But I got adjusted to it, and there was one kind of unusual glitch in 1991. We won't get into that set me back for a time. There was a distraction before I got involved in the gays and the military stuff and started getting involved in that personally in 1992. Um, there was kind of one period that was very distracting in 1991, but generally it was a very good adjustment. Now the career cardiac arrest was the layoff on December 13th, 2001. And we knew
Yeah.
it said, well, this is really interesting because it said, please, your account has been, I was talking to a user, an end user.
And if you want to know more about the
Yeah.
career cardiac
Yeah.
arrest, guess what, everybody? Go and read the book.
Well,
Now, chapter 5. I'm not going to
Okay.
lead the audience here as to what's in it. I want you, it's Head Up Elder Care. What's this chapter about?
Okay, it's about ultimately taking care of my mother from home. Her decline after I moved back in 2003. She passed away at the end of 2010. But in terms of principles, it's about whether children should be responsible for their elderly parents. Um, some states have filial responsibility laws. Children can actually be forced to support their parents in some states. There was a case in Pennsylvania in 2012. I've talked about places, but the experience of being home and then seeing my mother decline and then having the caregivers come in. The last 18 months, she was very dependent. We had caregivers there all the time. They were all we got them from agencies, healthcare agencies, and I'm sure they were all legal immigrants. I don't think. But that's who we depend on today for a lot of caregiving is immigrants. And this could become a real problem now, much more than it was then, of course, with what's going on.
Sure.
So that's why chapter 5 is important, elder care.
And it is very important to everybody. And it's just as important because, yes, I said to you there are 6 chapters in this first part, but you will see 5 chapters highlighted. And the 6th one really is, it's the epilogue. Now, if you want to know what's in the epilogue, I'm just going to say to you, read the book. Because what I want to do now is move on to part 2. I know the epilogue to Bill is very important, but I want you to read it, everybody. Find out what's in it. Bill, I want to go to part 2 now because this is just as important as part 1. And the book is headed up a fiction. And we have a look at 3 short stories you have written. But I must say, I do like the old black and white pictures you've got in the book. There are pictures in this book, everybody.
Right.
They are brilliant. So let's go to the second part. So have a look at the epilogue. Have a look at the pictures, everybody. So the first story we've got in the second part of the book is The Proles, Chapter 4, Interlude. I believe you wrote this in 1969, and this is your own fictional account about basic combat training, your experience in 1968.
Right.
Fort Wilson, the swearing-in ceremony, a bus ride, registration, and the baby-faced sergeant.
Well, I
It's a
changed
very fascinating story. Tell us.
because I went through basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, which is in Columbia, and it tracks pretty much with names changed and everything. And I was writing a book then, sort of a picaresque book, where I called myself John Morchek was the name of the character, and so the other things in it are sort of based on things that happened pretty closely. But basic training was it was very traumatic to get it to leave graduate school, grade papers for your students, and turn in the grades of the students you had as an instructor, and then 2 weeks later go in the Army yourself in basic training. And that's kind of what I'm trying to convey there. And then winding up in special training because I was behind physically. What was like for 4 weeks, and then I passed the PC to physical combat proficiency test on I guess it was the fourth try or the fourth week, and then I got to sort of sit around, and I remember talking to a few of the people that were there that had been stuck there for several months, and they really were disabled people that should not have been inducted. And they were basically basically being put in jail, what amounted to jail for
Really?
not being competent as men, as the men were expected to be then. That's what it amounted to. And that's kind of the story. This is pretty bad. But that was really going on. I mean, this is when we had a draft and people tried to get out of the draft. I think I talked about the draft physical, what that's like and how personal it is and so forth in places. And we had conscription, we had student deferments then, which went away in 1969 with the lottery when Nixon in December of 1969. But you could get out of you could defer if you were in college and majoring in a math or in a technical chemistry or in a scientific field. If you did get drafted, you got a college education, you were much more likely to not get into a combat unit. But I was in the Pentagon for 3 months and then wound up in Fort Eustis because there was a problem with the top secret clearance. And there was some other stuff that went on that's in the books. But that was interesting in itself. So that first story is basically driven from what going through basic training is like. And it's in detail. There have not been very many movies about that really shows what it's really like. Full Metal Jacket, I think it was Oliver Stone, and if I remember right, in 1987, shows it. But there have not been very many films that show what basic training is really like and what it's like to go through it and the shock of it. That ought to be done. Hollywood ought to, and what it was like during the Vietnam era. I mean, that ought to be done better than it's never been done very well.
And of course, in this book here, everybody, Bill has just given you a very brief insight here. Because there are the three short stories here in this third book.
Yeah.
Now, the second short story, Bill, Expedition, the story of the two former college roommates reuniting and going on a trip through countryside heavily damaged by strip mining for coal, I believe. And the conversation between Bill and, is it Randy, while traveling are quite curt at times. But it's a fascinating little story.
Yeah. And I have thought about that as a movie script, but I probably would put it together with my own dating and make it a two-part film if I made a movie. I've actually started writing a treatment for how you would make that a movie. I might try to pursue that story. I think that could go someplace, that story, if I worked on it. So that's all I'll say about it right now. But yeah, the strip mining scenes where you actually see the strip mines are graphic.
And the chit chat between the two characters here, Bill and Randy, is fascinating, everybody. Fascinating.
Okay.
Now, the third story, Bill, The Ocelot, The Way He Is, which you wrote in 2013, is, I believe, another road trip. And this one is more bizarre. So tell us about this one.
Or the ocelot, of course, is a cat, as you know, but when I was in the Army and with Fort Eustis, we gave the animal names to all the people that were in the office as a joke. And to be called an ocelot's actually a compliment because it's a very competent animal in the wild. So what this character, one of the characters is based on me, and then another character is based on somebody who is a combination of some people I knew, but he's presented as a concert pianist, and he's also presented and this is totally fictionalized, as a freshman college student down in Central Virginia, and he's living in a rented house next to an intentional commuter in the story. And so he invites Bill down, and Bill is attracted, or I think I called him John. I forget what I called him now, but the character based on me is attracted to this person. So he doesn't know what's going to happen when he goes down and sees this person and then goes into the intentional community. And so I'm not going to say more, but something does happen.
It
They
does
come
happen.
home, something does happen, and then they come home, and then the world is destroyed by, the world essentially comes to an end when they come home. Um, there was a movie a little bit like that called Old Joy, where a guy meets up with an old friend and goes into the woods. It doesn't end catastrophically, because they kind of have an intimate encounter in the woods. It was a movie in 2006 called Old Joy. You can look it up. It's a little bit like that.
So, everybody, I think we've given you a fair insight as to what this book is about. So, the first part, you've got the prologue, the foreword, the what I see is five predominant chapters, and then the sixth one, the epilogue, and then in the part two, the fiction section, you've got the three short stories. And I emphasize yet again, this is the third book in the series of Do Tell, Do Ask, but you need to read the books in sequence. That's the most important thing. You've got to read them in sequence, otherwise it's just not going to make any sense at all. So, Bill, do you intend to write any more books? And if you
Yes,
are they going to
yeah,
be
yeah,
in this series or something else? And when can we expect
yes,
it?
yes. I'm working on a fourth book now, which will cover the things that I didn't cover in the first three. And the most obvious thing, of course, is the gender identity issue that had started percolating maybe 2012, 2013, but which didn't get very much public attention, frankly, until after we were coming out of the pandemic. We went along, we didn't really know that it was going on. And so I talk a lot about that and how that is compared, because I talk about it in terms of gender nonconformity. And frankly, this third book simply and says, suck up, and if you want to do well in society, deal with it and learn to do better and learn to behave and become involved with other people's needs and give yourself some skin in the game.
So when can we
Especially
expect that one?
yeah. So it doesn't give you. And then what happened since then is people have, instead of saying this is about our being having to do what you say we have to do to be good citizens. We're different people. We have a different identity. In other words, identity politics, because we have a different biological identity of being trans, something or other. We should be treated as a group, as a suspect class, and you don't have a right to expect the same things of us that you expect of normie people. And so that's a very difficult problem ethically, because either people are equal and are treated equally in society in a sense as they are for what they are, or they aren't. And if you make it an identity, then you can protect people from discrimination and from but this is very, very difficult. I'm not going to get into it right now, but it's very, very difficult, obviously, to do with gender identity without affecting society more. And so that's what the fourth book will be about. I'm not getting into it much today, but that does need attention given what I said in the third book.
So do you hope to get that out in 2026?
Yeah, in 2026, I'm hoping to get it into editing by Christmas and have it, maybe in the spring of 2026. But there are other things. One of the other biggest things is the need for age verification on the internet, which is a huge problem. That's the other biggest problem I probably tackle. But I also talk about the free speech and freedom of reach and being a lone wolf the way I was. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about a few of the other problems. I've learned a lot about elections because I've worked on elections a lot in the last few years. So there's some things to say about that that haven't been said in the workplace, and a little bit about immigration, about a few of these, and just accelerationism. Are we really going to survive as a society? Are the rich people setting us up so they can go live in bunkers and leaving us out to dry, or as some people claim, or are we going to get through this current
So,
extremely polarized crisis with Trump,
wow.
So
So there's a
that's
lot coming up in this next book.
yeah, yeah, yes, there is. There
Okay.
is.
So who do you want to see reading your books, and where can people get your books from?
Well, they can get it on Amazon. They can get it on Amazon and or Barnes and Noble site. They can get it from the publisher iUniverse or Ex Libris. It's on their site. That there's going to be some changes in that soon to make it easier. You can order it from me from my website, but not many people do this. Usually a lot easier just to do it from the big sites. But that may change more with the fourth book. I may make it a lot easier to do it with me myself. And then, yeah, and
Who do you want to
uh,
see reading your book?
I would say people who particularly feel that they're not conforming, they have difficulty conforming to what society expects of them, and are concerned about what they're being told, about identity politics, and want to take more ownership of their own lives and not necessarily have to listen to politicians on either side. Because I'm kind of independent. I'm not either, I won't join a political party. I'm right in the middle. I may sound conservative, but I think I'm right in the middle because I don't justify anything that's going on. What January 6th is just absolutely horrible, what happened in the United States, in 2021. I'm not justifying anything that either side has done because both sides have done very bad things. So it's very difficult to join anybody right now because they both are doing terrible things sometimes.
Well, there you go, everybody. I've
Yes.
had the great privilege of looking at Bill's book and interviewing him, and I hope you've gained a little insight to what his book is about. And as we say, it's the third book in the series, and you need to read this series in sequence. And the fourth book might be out next year, 2026, and I hope he gives me the pleasure again of interviewing him about that book. But we'll see. We'll see, everyone. So all I say now is to Bill, thank you very much for joining me on my show, and I've thoroughly enjoyed reviewing your book. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm JT Crowley. Thanks for listening wherever in the world. Until next time, stay safe.